In this lesson, the last lesson in the unit, we're going to take a look at the beginnings of government regulation in the industrial era. By the 1890s, Americans were worried that they no longer had control over the nation's economy. The wealthy industrialists did. Railroads need to be singled out because of their unique status in the economy. Railroads were doing a couple of different things that were quite upsetting, and farmers had been complaining about them for some time. Pooling is one of these issues. Pooling is creating a geographic monopoly by giving specific railroad companies control over a specific area. As the map sort of shows, they were creating geographic monopolies. This is a modern railroad map showing commercial railroads, freight railroads, in all of North America. You can see there's a significant amount of overlap between companies today, but even on this map you can see where certain companies have exclusive territorial control in some of the areas here in North America. That doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong today. However, if we go back to the 1880s and 1890s, we know from past lessons that railroads were overcharging the farmers. Railroads were overcharging many small businesses, not just farmers, making shipping rates so high that it was prohibitive for businesses even to get into business because they wouldn't be able to afford the shipping rates. However, as this shows, the biggest and largest customers were actually receiving rebates or cash back, which only compounded the difficulty for small businesses trying to compete against larger businesses. As a result, the federal government is going to step in and create the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887. Through the Interstate Commerce Act, the government is going to oversee railroad operations. This is the first time you're going to have the federal government regulate any private business. And the first private business to come under federal regulation will be the railroads. You can see here the federal government set up a territorial map, and began to monitor the railroads. This Harper's Weekly magazine cover, a little bit in the future from the time period we're talking about. The GOP elephant, which stands for the Republicans, is being pushed by President Teddy Roosevelt, who we will talk about in a future unit, looking to do battle with the railroads to break up the railroad monopolies. What was passed in 1890 was the Sherman Antitrust Act. This law outlawed any trust that operated in restraint of trade or commerce among the several states. Unfortunately, this law was not used as intended originally. It was often used against workers initially to get them to go back to work, but we'll see again in an upcoming unit that President Teddy Roosevelt will use the Sherman Act in court against a number of large trust companies to force them to be broken up into smaller competing companies. That won't happen until the early 1900s. Another event that is going to have a dramatic impact on business doesn't happen until the early 1900s, but the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was an absolute disastrous situation. The Triangle Shirtwaist Company was located in Lower Manhattan, and the workers, basically it was a sweatshop making shirts, and the workers were locked in. A fire broke out. The workers were unable to flee. Many of them jumped out the windows. The result of this disaster led to a number of laws reforming business practices. And again, we will talk about those in the next unit going forward. So just to sum up then, the government is slowly going to begin to curb the abuses of the industrial era, and we'll learn also in a future unit part of the reason they act so slowly is the government is a bit corrupt as well. Railroads are going to be the first industry to come under government regulation. The Interstate Commerce Commission is going to be a government agency with oversight powers over the railroads. And the Sherman Antitrust Act would eventually be used to break up many of the large trusts. Not in the 1890s, not until the early 1900s, in an era that we call the Progressive Era. That's coming in a future unit.